Hello everybody and welcome to the first ever episode of the Cottoncast. I'm your host, Jacob Cotton, and in this episode we're going to be exploring a topic that means a lot to me and millions of other people all around the world. We're going to be exploring experimental electronic music and what makes it such a powerful form of artistic expression. Music is special to all of us in some way. In my opinion, the understanding that we can create something beautiful and expressive with sound is one of the most profound, influential things that can be credited to the human race. We have used music in many different ways all throughout history, and it speaks to us like nothing else does. In his book titled This Is Your Brain on Music, Daniel Levitin said, "Music is and was part of the fabric of everyday life, and throughout most of the world and for most of human history, music making was as natural an activity as breathing and walking. And everyone participated." This describes perfectly how essential music is to human life. We use music all the time in many different ways. We use it to uplift us, inspire us, help us relax, or to help us cope with our emotions. My journey with music began when I was 12 years old. The very first song that I ever remember liking was Lucretia, My Reflection by the Sisters of Mercy. I fell in love with the mysterious, kind of sensual vibe that this track gave off, with its moody bass, driving percussion, and bright synth. I asked, "Hey mum, please can we play that track again?" That song was really good. We listened to it again and again that day. I didn't pay much attention to music for a while afterwards, but I was soon to have an experience which left me awestruck. I was at school and there was a group of older kids playing some Black Sabbath covers. I can't remember what songs they were playing, but I knew that that's what it was because a friend told me afterwards. Anyway, I was astounded at what I'd just seen. I'd just witnessed people that were only slightly older than myself making expressive sounds with these cool-looking instruments. It actually really resonated with me, a lost young boy who felt quite ostracised from the crowd. Over the coming months, I started to pay attention to the music my parents were listening to around the house and in the car. Lots of classic rock and some gothic, industrial type stuff too. The first band t-shirt that I ever remember wearing was a Nine Inch Nails shirt back in 2013, which I wore because I absolutely loved Pretty Hate Machine and the Broken EP. Over the coming years, I got really into it. I started listening to a lot of rock and heavy metal music, some of which was on the quite extreme end of it. I loved metal music a lot, and I listened to it almost exclusively, until the year 2015, when I made a discovery that would truly change my life. I discovered electronic music. All of my friends were into electronic music too, which meant that I was exposed to more styles. A bit of house, dubstep, some hip-hop, and a smudge of ambient music served as my gateway into something amazing which continues to be a very big thing in my life. At the time, this music felt expressive in a very unique way. It always felt like a breath of fresh air when I heard a track that sounded nice, and it didn't involve conventional instruments. There was just something about the concept of using electronics in music that helped bring music alive for me. It was really interesting to hear what people were coming up with within this genre. I was having a blast listening to this music. At the time, I was listening to a lot of popular stuff, and a few more obscure acts too. I just absolutely loved chilling out to this music. Although my first exposure to the more experimental side of electronic music was when a friend recommended that I listen to some IDM, which rather bigotedly stands for Intelligent Dance Music. Somehow I ended up on YouTube listening to an album called Try Repete by an English experimental duo called Orteca. I hated Orteca at first, except for one of the ambient tracks at the end. I remembered the name though, and I came back to it later, eventually learning to love it. We'll talk more about Autechre later on. To help me explore experimental music today, I thought that I'd have my mate Dillon on the podcast with me. He studies music at college, and he also produces electronic music in his spare time. He goes under the name of Telluric, and he's been really into it for a while, and I thought that it'd be really interesting to have a chat with him about it. Hi Dillon, mate. How are you doing?
I'm not bad, thank you. Yeah, I mean, today's kind of been like a little bit stressful for me. Got an exam tomorrow, so lots of revision. But it's been good overall, yeah. Yeah. Nice
one. So, we're going to be talking about electronic music today. So, what was your first experience of electronic music?
My first experience was actually from watching films like The Guest and Drive. I mean, like, I love all the atmospheres that are created on it, how you can listen to the songs afterwards and still feel the same things whilst you felt as watching the film. I also quite got into other soundtracks like 2001: A Space Odyssey. That's one of the first sort of experimental things I got into, because the overture music is kind of it's avant-garde. It's like free classical. It's like people are playing stuff, any notes they choose.
Yeah.
And I was actually quite into that back a while ago when I was about 13, believe it or not. But yeah, I think that was like one of the first instances where I got into electronic music was through film and other media.
Okay, that's really interesting. Cool, thanks for sharing that with us. After hearing Autechre, I kind of forgot about music for a while due to the fact that I got into a really stressful time in my life. It wouldn't be long, however, until my love for music was reignited when I was introduced to the music of Radiohead. Radiohead are still my favourite band of all time. At first, I shunned their later output in favour of their earlier stuff, due to the fact that I didn't really like the experimentation. It made me really uncomfortable and it sounded all discordant, although my thoughts about it changed quite quickly. I really started to like the way in which they incorporated electronics into their music, specifically around the time that Kid A and Amnesiac were released. I loved the way that the synthesizers on these albums contributed to a foreboding, kind of creepy atmosphere, although I didn't know of any other musicians who were doing it. So Dillon, what's your favourite electronic music artist and what's your favourite work of electronic music and why?
Well, I'd like to say Wolfgang Voigt's Gas Projects again, but I've already spoke quite a lot about that. But yeah, it would have to be him because there's something about his music. It's all in the conceptual stuff. As much as I like electronic for the what the listener can associate it with, I do really like Gas's project, like from Zauberberg to Rausch, Narco Pop. They're all just fantastic. They have different moods. You can listen to anything.
Yeah.
If you're like sad, you can listen to Zauberberg because it's kind of wintry sounding. If you're happy, listen to Pop, which is the most popular one.
Yeah, I really like Pop myself, actually.
Yeah, Pop is amazing. I love the way he incorporates beats. So it's kind of he's pretty much quite an influential artist for ambient techno. And if I had to choose a favourite ambient techno artist, I'd have to choose. It's got to be Aphex Twin, because massive influence for the genre itself. Basically, the pioneer. Especially his early stuff, Ambient Works, Volume 1 and 2. They're just up there in terms of it. But even I think one of my favourites is actually Surfing on Sine Waves, surprisingly, by Polygon Window. I just love the atmosphere on it, the cold sort of dark moodiness, combined with sort of the repetition again that lets you zone out and think for yourself. It just reminds me of Britain, but the good parts of Britain, not the bad parts. Like, it just reminds me of tube stations for some reason. I don't know why I get that image. And cold beaches and cloudy days.
Fair enough, yeah.
And
That's
yeah,
cool.
it's, if I had to choose a favourite work, it's really tough. If it was my favourite work by Gas is Koenigsforst. Because it's a great blend between the sound he later done on Pop and Zauberberg. It's got an autumnal sort of vibe to it, from the yellow artwork to the lush instrumentation. It's got harps in it. It's got like loads of sort of grainy, sort of feedbacky surface noise like you would hear on a vinyl or something. And it's fantastic. But if I say my favourite at the minute though is I'm going to mess up this guy's name. I think it's Tetsu Inu. Yeah, Tetsu Inu. His album YOLO is just so good. It's minimal and it's ambient, and it's just I can get lost in it. It's the atmospheres on it is so intriguing to me. Yeah, so I'd have to choose YOLO for my favourite at the minute. It's hard just to choose one. Like I said, I chose three, but YOLO at the minute is my favourite.
What would you say electronic music does differently to music with conventional instruments?
Well, music with conventional instruments, such as like rock music, for instance, that's just the first thing that pops into my head. A lot of rock music has sort of a sound and sort of emotion that's already decided for the audience. Like if you're listening to something, I don't know, crap like like Avenged Sevenfold, it's supposed to be angry music. It's all decided for you. And in some electronic music, you don't necessarily get that. So if you listen to, let's say, Try Repeat or Amber by Ortega, there's a lot of different things you can get out of it. It's not actually deciding the emotion for you. It's as you listen to it, you associate it with the places you've been, or like the things like memories or anything. Like for instance, Amber. Amber, like, just reminds me of like going on holiday and stuff. I used to listen to it in the car on the way to holiday.
Really? Oh.
And it reminds me of different locations. For some reason, Amber, I actually don't really know why, but it reminds me of the place I used to go when I was little, called Hemsby, right by the beach. It's got kind of the sounds that come through it and the emotions you get from it aren't spoken directly at you. Like, you know, Montreal. As you listen to Montreal, the first thing you think is, this is a catchy song. And then, because it's repetition, sorry. As the repetition goes on, it starts to become kind of ambient. You start thinking, like, it starts to fade into the background, and it makes you look at the location you're in.
Okay,
so, for instance,
that makes sense.
if I'm in a car and I hear like Foil or Silverside, for instance. It repeats to the point of me forgetting I'm listening and using my eyes to look at the location. And that is really what it does differently to everything else. It lets you associate it with different things that is personal to the listener, especially ambient music. And some of it's kind of decided for you, like conceptual stuff, like Wolfgang Vogt's Gas project.
Amazing guy, yeah.
Yeah, like the concept of that is decided. Like as you listen to it, you don't really associate it with locations. You associate it with the forest and stuff like that, because that's what's decided on the artwork and the concept that Wolfgang gives to the listener.
Yeah.
Again, like rock music, you listen to a metal band and you know it's angry. You listen to Sire Rose and you know it's sort of sad and mournful. Electronic music just lets the listener actually just decide for themselves a little bit more. It's a bit more free to experience.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it, actually. I haven't thought of it that way before.
So, yeah, I was intrigued by the way that Radiohead were using electronics to enhance their music. So, I went on Reddit and I looked for artists similar to Radiohead. I then came across a thread where people were looking for the same thing as me. A trawl through the comments section of this thread didn't really reveal much that I found interesting, until somebody recommended an album called Geogaddy by a Scottish duo called Boards of Canada. The album's weird name piqued my interest, and I listened to the first 2 tracks. The rest is history. This became one of my favourite albums of all time. Since then, I just knew that there was a whole world of wild, unique electronic music out there just ripe for the taking. I became really properly into electronic music. I explored the music of Warp Records, which is a prominent experimental music label from Sheffield, and a few other more unusual underground artists. It wasn't long until I realised that this interest in electronic music was here to stay. I'm really interested in electronic music primarily because of its ability to express emotion in a way that no other medium can. It's unlimited. With waveforms, anything is possible, and for a lot of people, electronics are the easiest way of harnessing their power. There's just so much variety in electronic music as well. In the words of my college tutor, Dr. Paul Nataraj, electronic music is just as much Little Mix as it is Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, a highly influential electronic composer. Of course, there's nothing wrong with liking more traditional music. It obviously has its merits, as we've been using a lot of the same instruments for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They allow us to express ourselves really effectively, and it sounds good to our ears. But for myself, as well as a lot of other people, there's something really special about alternative means of creating music. Naturally, as humans, we have a tendency for progression. It was instinctive of us to just keep going further with music. We eventually reached the point where we realised that we could incorporate artificial sounds into our music. This is when shit got real. I think that in order to understand why this type of music is such a powerful form of expression, we first have to understand why electronic music has become such a widely accepted genre. We have electronics all around us. We are living in a new age of progress. We are surrounded by electronic devices to the extent that every home and establishment has them. Hey, we're essentially cyborgs at this point too. Our phones are like extensions of our bodies, and we've become so reliant on computers in many aspects of our everyday lives. From leisure to productivity, you name it, electronics are involved in some way. Electronics are changing us, and we are changing it. It's adapting and starting to respond to our human needs. Hell, we even have smart fridges these days. Due to these advancements, we decided that music needed to be involved in this electronic takeover too. It is a very human thing if you think about it. Electronic music is a key element in this post-human age we're entering, and because machines are part of our daily productivity now, then surely they should be part of our artistic expression too, right? It's also become a really accessible thing, which I think makes it even more special, even more human. Yeah, expensive gear definitely has its merits, but it's not essential. With the right amount of practice, anyone can make tunes on their laptop now. You can even learn music production quite easily on the internet these days. A tune could be anything. Hell, you could even make a song out of a sampled alarm clock if you wanted to. What's crazy is that electronic music has actually been around for a lot longer than people realise. It has its roots hundreds of years ago. There was a guy called Prokop Divis. I really don't know if I butchered that name, but anyway. He was supposedly the inventor of the very first electronic instrument, which was called the denidor. He supposedly made the denidor around 1748. 1748? I was shocked when I discovered that. Anyway, there were various written accounts of people seeing this instrument in action, but nobody really knows whether or not it generated its own sound or whether it merely altered already existing acoustics. Nobody knew anything about this instrument because it vanished. It just completely disappeared when it got sold to somebody in Vienna. Gone, just like that. Weird, eh? So yeah, the disappearance of this keyboard obviously wasn't the end of it all though. People still continued to experiment. There were various experimental instruments designed and built after this. For example, there was a thing called the telharmonium, which was an instrument designed by someone called Thaddeus Cahill in the 1890s. It was an absolutely huge thing, so huge that it took up an entire room. He created this instrument with one of the fundamentals of electronic music in mind. He thought that if you had a way to move electrons in sine wave shapes, you could theoretically author any sound that you wanted. This was accomplished by spinning cogs, called tone wheels, next to an electromagnetic receiver in order to create oscillations. Incredible, right? Although the idea of electronic music was still largely theoretical until around the 1920s, when a Russian guy called Lev Terman, also known as Leon Theremin, came up with an instrument called the theremin. The theremin is a pretty awesome thing. It was really small, and it was also the very first instrument that you could play without actually touching, thanks to antennae, which generate a magnetic field. It was a massively influential instrument, in fact, that it prompted some of the very first electronic compositions, such as the first Airphonic Suite for theremin and orchestra by Joseph Schillinger in 1929. Around this time, there was also a very odd instrument called the Ons Martineau, which was a creepy, alien-sounding instrument that you would play by playing a keyboard in conjunction with moving a ring along a piece of wire, which would alter the pitch of the sound. Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead is one of the few people that actually use this rare instrument, and you can hear it on a lot of Radiohead songs.
I float down the left I'm not here. This isn't happening.
There were also some other really odd instruments that didn't really gain much traction, such as the electrophone and the trautonium. But shit really started to get real a few decades later when synthesizers started to become more developed. Somebody called Robert Moog was running a business, R.A. Moog, that sold theremins and theremin kits via mail order. He made a bit of money off this for a while, but in the early 60s, he made an invention that would change the face of music forever. The Moog modular synthesizer was very small compared to its predecessors, and it featured a set of components that would go down in music history as the ideal set of components for creating sound for use in music. It had a set of built-in modules, including an analog voltage-controlled oscillator, filter, and amplifier. Uniquely, it also had a keyboard, which made it more suitable for musicians. This instrument was amazing, and it played a massive part in helping bring in electronic music to the masses. It's been used by many artists to this day, including the Monkees, who famously used it in their song Daily Nightly. Also, the Beatles used it throughout the Abbey Road sessions. There were also numerous Moog records getting released, such as an album called Switched on Bach, which featured an American musician called Wendy Carlos using the Moog to play a bunch of Bach compositions, which played a huge role in bringing synthesizers to the masses because it appealed to the classical crowd. New Scientist even went as far as to dub it the first commercial synthesizer. Moog had already gone down in history with his modular system, but a few years later, he unveiled another awesome invention, the Mini Moog. The Mini Moog was a minuscule instrument compared to the predecessor. It went down as one of the most influential synths in history. It was used by lots of iconic artists like Kraftwerk, Pink Floyd, Gary Newman, and even hip-hop producers like Dr. Dre and Jay Dilla. That was Pink Floyd with Shine On You Crazy Diamond. Anyway, it helped to prove to people that synthesizers weren't just random noise generators. They could be used really well in a musical context too. Although, funnily enough, some fans of experimental electronic music today actually don't mind listening to random noise, and we'll talk about that later. Anyway, people were waking up to the fact that electronic music could be beautiful, and more people started designing and making these instruments. Say for example Donald Buchler, who was the founder of Buchler. He designed the Buchler 100 series. There was also Alan R. Perlman, who founded ARP. He created the awesome ARP 2500 and 2600 synthesizers. It started to get a lot easier to create electronic music, and as a result, we embarked on a very important, very beautiful journey. Around the late 70s and 80s, this kind of music started to get really popular, and the synth era began, because people were starting to hear more and more of electronics in popular music. But why? Why did we choose to go on this journey? For the same reason as we went down the path of making music in the first place. It's instinctive. We want to explore every possibility open to us.
So, what got you the drive to start making electronic music?
Well, it all started from sort of the visual aspects of it. So I was actually into films for quite a while. Lots of films with sort of synth-heavy soundtracks, like Drive, if you've heard of Drive.
I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah, the soundtrack's great, and that's when I first got into ambient music. There's something about this that works really well. Like, I don't even have to watch the film, and I can know what's happening in the scene. I can hear this song, and I know it's a sad song. I can hear this one, I know it's like a dramatic song.
Yeah.
And I thought it made me think that ambient music isn't just one note that tries to make you go to sleep or something. It's
absolutely. Yeah.
It's really good at reflecting sort of different emotions and different sort of atmospheres and stuff. So when I started off, I released my first album, which I'm not too fond of, but I'm glad I did it because it started my whole back catalogue. But it was 2.5 hours long, which is crazy. Yeah, it's called
Dual.
like Telluric One.
Oh
no, yeah,
right,
Jules
yeah.
a bit later. Yeah, it's called Telluric One, and every song was 20 minutes. And I started off like you could hear my ideas lose focus towards the end.
Yeah,
it starts off all droney, and then beats start coming in, and I'm like, what is going on? This doesn't even sound ambient anymore. So like after that, I made A Walk Through Snow, which is to this day it used to be my most successful. I think it was like something about the way it sounds. Like there's one song called Skift, which is actually got my most listeners. it's like a 12-minute song composed of a piano and the pull stretch. I love that pull stretch.
Yeah, I really like that one myself,
and
actually.
It's just repeated all the way through the 12 minutes that it lasts. And that was really what got me all the drive to keep going, is the success that album got. So I went on to create the Evershift, City Sounds, and now I'm making some IDM-inspired stuff, like Warranty, the one you did the artwork for. Which is another one of my most successful, and I like to experiment with different genres, and that's really among all else, I think, is the main thing that keeps me going, is that trying like different genres, and always experimenting, see what works, seeing what the public thinks of it. It's just so much fun, and it's just a lot of fun, and that's the thing that keeps me going.
Now that we've got the means to explore the limitless realm of sound, people have done all sorts of cool stuff with it to sate this innate curiosity. Take Delia Derbyshire, for example. She created the Doctor Who theme song in 1963, before synthesizers were even readily available. She used what was available to her at the BBC Radiophonic Workshop, which was very basic gear. She created the piece of music, composed by Ron Grainer, by carefully editing bits of tape which contained samples such as white noise, strings being plucked, and waveforms she had generated on test tone oscillators. The speeds of the samples were changed to get the effect that she wanted. They were arranged and finally mixed to create something awesome that would go down in history. Truly one of the most iconic and recognisable pieces of music out there. All because of the fact that a regular person, just like me and you, had the initiative to go out there and experiment with what they had available to them. So, now I'm going to go back to what I briefly mentioned earlier. The music of the pioneering electronic music duo Autechre is some of the craziest stuff I've ever heard. Autechre consists of Rob Brown and Sean Booth, two guys from Rochdale who got together through the Manchester graffiti scene in 1987. They went on to create some amazing stuff. They started making techno music in the late 80s and early 90s, releasing a few albums on a label called Warp, which is home to lots of experimental acts. We'll talk more about Warp Records in a bit. Rob Brown and Sean Booth were involved in the rave scene, which was very much alive and booming when they started making music. They were exposed to a lot of the dance music that was going on at the time, but they decided that they wanted to give it their own twist. They started off using hardware, making fairly minimalist, of its time electronic music, but after their 1994 album, Amber, they embarked on a journey of true discovery. They went from making music that sounded like this, to this. The first one was Nil from Amber, and the second one was Blade Laws from their album XI in 2013. These guys are still active today and are making music in a way nobody else is. Around the late 90s, they started to use a visual programming language called Max MSP to create some of the most challenging but rewarding music to this day. They've got a very dedicated, active fan base and have released a multitude of albums that are quite difficult to digest but really pay off if you give it a chance. For example, the sound design in this track called Fold Free Casual is astonishing, and it's one of the standout points of their discography in my opinion. Oh, and about the weird track titles, they've said in interviews that their song titles are often inside jokes, random words that sound good together, or words that they think describe the track, mixed with the idea that the music should speak for itself. Speaking of their creative process, Sean Booth said something really interesting. He said, "We love artificial things. Artificial means man-made and manufactured by humans. There is this notion that electronic music is not human because it is artificial. I think that it's intrinsically human. I haven't seen or heard of any other species who use computers. They are uniquely human things. They perform live in total darkness so that the viewer can concentrate on nothing but the sound that they are experiencing, with the idea that sound is very much a physical, 3D thing. Seeing them live is definitely on my bucket list." These guys are incredibly prolific, having released 16 studio projects and 28 live shows. Also, alongside Boards of Canada, these guys are one of my favourite electronic music artists. There's just so much variety in their work, and there's so much exciting material to explore. Their album XI in 2013 was 2 hours long. LSEG, also known as Edited Live Sequences, was 4 hours long, and their latest work, NTS Sessions 1-4, is a whopping 8 hours long. There's so much to listen to, and I can't wait to see what else I can uncover from their discography. If you ask me, Autechre are pretty much the embodiment of what it means to be experimental in art. Just like Delia Derbyshire did in the Radiophonic Workshop, they've looked at what's available to them and thought about how they could use it in a totally unique way, realising their own unique take on music and sharing it with the world, presenting new ideas and inspiring other people to come up with their own ideas too. Although they're still relatively obscure, Autechre are commonly regarded as one of the most important duos in electronic music by die-hard fans, and they're well worth a listen. Their discography is a big adventure, and I really recommend it. There's also definitely something to be said for the whole Warp Records label, to be honest. This label, started in 1989 by Steve Beckett, Rob Gordon and Robert Mitchell, is the epitome of abstraction in electronic music. Loads of landmark releases have been put out on this label, like the Autechre stuff I mentioned earlier, the work of Richard D. James, also known as Aphex Twin, Flying Lotus, who is the grandnephew of Alice Coltrane, John Coltrane's wife, Plaid and Boards of Canada, among loads of other really cool artists. Warp Records have been vital to the introduction of electronic listening music to people's ears. This wasn't just music for dancing on a night out, but for casually listening to and chilling out to as well. Warp put out a series of standalone albums and a compilation album called Artificial Intelligence, which helped to bring this stuff to the masses, which in turn made people more aware of a different side of electronic music. Just like Autechre, I think Aphex Twin is another example of a highly visionary electronic artist. Richard D. James was born in Ireland and grew up in Cornwall, with an interest in electronics, computer programming and acoustics. He bought his first synthesizer at the age of 12, which began a long career of fierce experimentation. He started modifying analog synthesizers and making weird noises from an early age, going on to be one of electronic music's most recognizable, influential artists. He's released loads of albums comprising of loads of weird and wonderful things in the IDM and ambient genres, even occasionally doing some unusual noise music type stuff. He's released various celebrated albums, such as the Selected Ambient Works albums, the Richard D. James album in 1996, Drux in 2001, and Zero in 2014, which came after a decade-long hiatus. He has also done a lot of music under different names, like Polygon Window and AFX. It's even speculated that he puts out music entirely anonymously sometimes. He's made some really complex stuff like this. And some really mellow, beautiful tracks like this. which has touched the hearts of many people. Aphex is massively influential and important to electronic music. Thomas Bangalter from Daft Punk cited him as an influence for Discovery in 2001. Also, Tom York of Radiohead cited him as an influence, saying, Aphex Twin burns a heavy shadow, opening another world that doesn't involve my fucking electric guitar. And he also said, Aphex was totally beautiful. Even Skrillex shared an Aphex track to his Facebook, saying that it's his favourite song ever. He's also received a lot of critical acclaim, for example with Paul Lester of The Guardian saying of him, he's the most inventive and influential figure in electronic music. Aphex Twin is massively influential in the sense that, just like Tom York said, he's one of, if not the most important, well-known musicians to be making experimental electronic music. He's inspired a lot of other people to go down this path too. Just like the entire Warped roster, he's helped to reveal a much more out there, artistic side to electronic music. This, mixed with his quirky image and rumours about him supposedly living in an abandoned bank vault and driving a tank, makes him one of electronic music's most noteworthy artists. It's artists like these that are helping to push the music scene into new territory. People are even starting to make music with plants, using something called MIDI Sprout. MIDI Sprout is a technology developed by Data Garden, which is an arts organisation and record label founded by two guys called Joe Patitucci and Alex Tyson. It comes as a little device with electrodes that you can place onto a plant's surface. It then converts the biodata it receives into musical notes and synthesizer parameters, meaning that it's a biosonification device. In fact, plant music is getting pretty popular, with loads of people uploading their own plant music pieces and compilations to YouTube. There's also an online radio station called Plants FM where you can listen to this stuff as much as you want. I actually really want one of these, I'm not gonna lie. It looks awesome. Truly groundbreaking stuff. There's also people like Brian Eno experimenting with generative music. Take for example his album Reflection in 2017, which was accompanied by an iOS app that generated music infinitely.
What would you say is your favourite example of experimentation you've ever heard in electronic music?
My favourite example of it, I quite like Arca, his production, if it's whether his solo stuff or his stuff for Bjork or FKA Twigs. He does a lot of really cool things in his production. It's hyper detailed. He does stuff like samples of coins dropping. There's one FKA Twigs song which is the beat is entirely made out of the sounds of coins falling on a table, and you can hear it. And it doesn't become distracting. It's actually utilised really well. So it's like experimental, yet it's really, I wouldn't say accessible, but it's like easy to listen to if you're into like IDM music. And even Arca's sort of solo work, such as Zen, the production is just crazy. Like, I don't even know how he does it. He's all these samples looping together. They've been stretched and manipulated, and I feel like it does actually combine a lot of different genres together. I can hear minimal, like, sort of beats, clicks and stuff, sort of clipping high notes as well. And there's ambient drones underneath it, and even for his production for Utopia, Bjork's newest album, it's got loads of flutes in it and stuff, but it still maintains the electronic aesthetic, but it just keeps it experimental, and I think it works really well as a whole,
Cool.
Another example of an artist that's caught my eye recently is a British guy called Kieran Hebden, also known as Fortet. Fortet has been around since the late 90s. I haven't heard a lot of his stuff quite yet, just his albums New Energy from 2017 and There Is Love in You from 2010. But it's honestly some of the most beautiful electronic music I've ever heard, and honestly, I can't recommend it enough. I think his track 2017 is just amazing. His track Lush is really nice too, really beautiful stuff that I like to listen to when I'm just chilling.
What are your thoughts on Fortet, Dillon?
I quite like Fortet. It's one of the few, I wouldn't say few, but there's a lot of, IDM is quite a widespread genre, but it's one of the IDM artists that's kind of combining electronic with kind of acoustic manipulations and stuff like that, like Rounds. If you listen to Rounds, it's got acoustic drums and stuff in it.
Oh yeah, I've heard a bit of that.
Acoustic samples and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's all been chopped up, and it almost sounds like jazz fusion if you really pay attention in some places. Yeah, Fortet are great. I still need to get into them a bit more, but yeah, I think they're pretty high up in terms of IDM music.
The way I see it, this kind of stuff is a massive middle finger to the people who've only heard traditional EDM that think that electronic music can't be emotional. Can't believe that there's still people out there who think like that. Music, by its very nature, is an emotional, beautiful thing. Another thing you see for me, it isn't just the music that's beautiful. The ways in which people create this music are beautiful too. There's definitely something to be said for electronic instruments.
So, what do you use to make your music, Dillon?
What do I use? So I usually use Logic. I basically use Logic. That's all I use. I actually started off using Audacity. Like I used to sample stuff. I used to record stuff off of like some pianos and stuff, my keyboard upstairs. And I used to like pull stretch it and stuff like that. That used to be my sound back then. It used to just be pull stretch drones, and that was it.
Yeah,
and I
remember.
used to layer it over the top. But yeah, now I use Logic. It's a lot more fun to use. It's very, very simple, and I think the plugins are pretty good. I can do a lot with them. I like to use lots of delay and stuff to create drones out of instruments you wouldn't usually expect, like a koto and stuff like that. So yeah, Logic and Audacity mainly.
You see, for me, although a digital computer-based setup is amazing and gets the job done, making music with fully analog gear is a very special thing. Nothing beats having a physical instrument that's made up of actual circuitry that you can have in open space and manipulate in real time, shaping whatever sounds that you find desirable. In fact, lots of people actually prefer using analog gear to computers now, and not just because of the technicalities of analog, but because there's something beautiful about generating sound with a circuit. Even modular synths, just like the original Moogs, are becoming fashionable again, which I think is awesome. You've got people using these massive sci-fi, imposing looking machines that make insanely beautiful music. It's wicked. It's relatively active here in the UK, but there's a fairly big scene of people over in America doing this type of stuff, with artists like Austin Cairns, also known as R. Benny, using their instruments in a really neat way to create beautiful soundscapes. You should totally give R. Benny a listen, he's awesome. There's also Caitlin Aurelia Smith, who is an experimental electronic musician doing some really cool stuff with Buchla gear. Also, there's Brian Knoll, also known as Lightbath, who is another guy that's made some really cool ambient stuff that you can check out on YouTube and Spotify if you want. Totally awesome. The modular synth scene is a really deep rabbit hole you should check out if you want some really good music, especially ambient and techno stuff. These instruments are really cool and effective because you can build a modular system over time and it's made of components of your own choosing. There's also another really interesting thing going on that my friend told me about. There's a type of minimalist ambient music called lowercase music. It's basically produced through the electronic amplification of very quiet sounds into something loud enough to be listened to as a standalone piece. I think this is an awesome idea and was pretty astounded by it, to be honest. I'll probably end up listening to a lot more of it. A prime example of lowercase music is a 54-minute long album by a guy called Steve Roden. It's called Forms of Paper. It was released in 2001 and Steve made it by recording the sounds of him handling paper and amplifying it. It sounds pretty cool actually, like this. It's really odd how he's made the paper sound completely unrecognisable. It sounds almost beepy, it doesn't sound like paper at all, but nevertheless it's wicked. Interestingly enough, it was actually commissioned for the Hollywood branch of the Los Angeles Public Library, and they played a 10-minute version of it out of 8 speakers that were covered in discarded library books repeatedly for a month. It was created as a form of, reactionary thing that went in juxtaposition to all of the loud noises that we all get exposed to in contemporary music. I thought that was an amazing idea, and it's just amazingly cool, and I think it's another example of people using their initiative combined with thinking outside of the box to create something completely unique. I haven't actually delved too deeply into lowercase music yet, but I know that there's lots of other artists doing it too, like Tetsu Inu, who's got an album called World Receiver, which I still need to check out. Although it's been referred to as a mini-genre, in a way, it's kind of similar to a thing called musique concrète, which is a fairly cool style of electronic music that came up in Paris around the 1930s. People making musique concrète music would group non-musical sounds, known as concrete sounds, together into a kind of montage. Take this, for example, Apostrophe by Pierre Schaeffer and Pierre Henry. That's crazy, right? Yeah, it's a really good example of early electronic music and some of the unusual sounds that came out of the musique concrète movement. I'm actually experimenting with this kind of thing myself, and I plan to release an album in a similar sort of style later on this year, which I'll share here when it's done. Although my taste in electronic music generally lies with more experimental stuff that could also probably be described as sound art, people obviously have very different tastes in this stuff. In a genre so varied, with many different subgenres, there's literally thousands upon thousands of uniquely talented artists to explore, and all of them each have their own take on making this stuff. So anyway, I think it's about time to wrap up now. Personally, I can't wait to see what's next for the world of electronic music. It's just going to keep getting even more advanced. I think it also says an awful lot about our ingenuity as humans too. New ideas are emerging constantly, and as more and more new artists are popping up on the scene, we're getting whole new genres and sounds to explore.
What's next for Telluric, and why?
I'm saying it's probably another album in the series, because that's a thing I like doing all the time. A series kind of lets me know what sound I'm creating from the start. It makes the creative process a lot quicker. So the next one I'm doing is a sequel to In the Eye of the Storm. It's parts 8 to 14, and it's carrying on that sound. And the way I actually started that sound to begin with was just by making a track and thinking, what kind of mood does this evoke? And I thought it evoked sort of thunderstorms and lightning. The synths actually sounded like raindrops and lightning and stuff like that.
Yeah,
so I thought I'm going to build on that. Yeah, I thought I'm going to build on that and carry it on for the next release. And yeah, hopefully it's good. And that comes out on Friday, by the way.
Can't wait to hear it, man.
Yeah, I can't wait for it to be released as well.
Yeah, alright, cool.
It makes me really happy that this stuff is playing out right in front of me, and I honestly can't wait to see what's next for us. Contrary to what a lot of music fans would say in the YouTube comment section, I was definitely born in the right generation. Please, if anything, keep making those Soulful Oscillations. That was Cottoncast Episode 1, Soulful Oscillations. Cheers for listening, and peace out.